The person you are trying hardest to hold on to is the same person your effort is quietly teaching to leave. Somewhere inside every avoidant heart there is a door, and most people spend years pounding on that door, believing that louder knocking will somehow change the lock. It will not. What nobody tells you is that the very behaviors you think are proving your love are often the exact behaviors confirming their deepest fear. There is a moment, invisible to the naked eye, where devotion turns into pressure, and pressure turns into distance, and distance gets mistaken for a lack of feeling when it is actually the opposite. 4 specific things you are doing right now, this week, maybe this very day, are pushing this person further from you, and they have almost nothing to do with texting, chasing, or checking their online status. They have to do with something far older, far deeper, buried in the architecture of how a human mind learns to survive closeness. Before this ends, you will understand exactly why safety and suffocation can look identical from the outside, and why the very hands trying to hold on are sometimes the hands that let go first. Avoidance is not the absence of love. It is the presence of an old survival strategy wearing the mask of indifference. Most people study the avoidant partner from the outside, watching behavior, tracking patterns, analyzing silence, when the real answer lives in a place no behavior chart can reach, which is the nervous system itself. A person does not become avoidant because they lack feeling. A person becomes avoidant because somewhere in their history, feeling became dangerous. Closeness once meant intrusion, or control, or disappointment so heavy it altered how safety itself got defined. Understanding this single fact changes everything about how you respond to distance, because distance is rarely rejection. Distance is regulation. Reassurance, when given without restraint, does not calm an avoidant nervous system. It activates it. This is the first hidden truth almost nobody in relationship psychology speaks about honestly. When you constantly explain your intentions, defend your loyalty, or repeat your feelings in an attempt to soothe their doubt, you are not building trust. You are unintentionally signaling desperation, and desperation reads to an avoidant mind as instability. Stability is the one thing an avoidant person is unconsciously scanning for at all times, and the moment they sense that your emotional world depends on their response, their body interprets you as unpredictable, even if your words are calm. This is not because they are cruel. It is because their nervous system has learned that unpredictable emotional environments precede pain. The first thing you must never do is chase clarity through repeated reassurance. Every time you ask an avoidant partner to confirm their feelings again, you are asking their nervous system to relive the exact pattern that taught them closeness is exhausting. There is a strange irony hidden inside this dynamic. The partner seeking reassurance believes they are creating safety, while the avoidant partner experiences that same reassurance seeking as a demand. A demand, no matter how gently phrased, registers in the body as pressure. And pressure to an avoidant nervous system feels like the walls of a room slowly closing in. What looks like love from one side can feel like confinement from the other, and neither person is lying about their experience. This is the paradox almost no one addresses. Both people are telling the truth. Their nervous systems are simply speaking 2 different survival languages. Human beings do not fall in love with words. They fall in love with regulation. When you are around someone and your body finally exhales, when your shoulders drop and your breathing slows without effort, that is not chemistry, that is neurological safety. Avoidant partners are drawn to people who can offer that regulation without requiring anything in return. The moment you begin requiring proof of love as a condition for your own calm, you are no longer offering safety. You have become another variable they must manage. This is the second thing you must never do, and it is more subtle than the first. Do not make your emotional stability dependent on their consistency. The instant your peace of mind is outsourced to their behavior, you have handed them a responsibility they were never equipped to carry, and avoidant people, more than almost any other attachment style, fear being responsible for another person's emotional state. There is a quiet cruelty in how modern relationship advice treats avoidant people, painting them as cold, calculated, emotionally unavailable villains hiding behind walls. This portrayal misses the deeper architecture entirely. An avoidant person often feels far more than they show, but showing feeling once meant losing control, and losing control once meant being hurt, dismissed, or overwhelmed by someone else's emotional needs. So they built a system. That system is not indifference. It is armor forged in a moment when armor was necessary for survival. The tragedy is that the same armor built to protect them in childhood becomes the very thing that isolates them in adulthood, and most avoidant people are not even consciously aware this trait is happening inside them every single day. Consider a different kind of story, one you have likely never heard used to explain this dynamic. Picture a locksmith who spent decades building the most sophisticated locks in the world, each one designed to keep intruders out after his own home was broken into as a child. Years later, he falls in love, and without realizing it, he installs the same locks on his own heart. His partner does not want to break in. His partner simply wants to be led inside occasionally, gently, without force. But the locksmith cannot tell the difference between someone trying to invade and someone trying to connect because his nervous system was trained on threat, not on trust. This is the emotional reality living inside most avoidant partners, and no amount of pushing on a door built by fear will ever make that door open faster. Pressure only reinforces the lock. The third thing you must never do is punish distance with withdrawal disguised as boundaries. This one is dangerous because it feels justified. When an avoidant partner pulls away, the instinct is to protect yourself by pulling away harder, proving that you also do not need them, matching their coldness with your own. This creates something far more destructive than distance. It creates a silent competition of who can care less, and in that competition, real intimacy becomes impossible because both people are now performing detachment instead of practicing honesty. True boundaries are not about withdrawing love to punish someone into returning. True boundaries are about staying rooted in your own values while allowing the other person the space to move at the pace their nervous system requires. There is a profound difference between protecting your peace and weaponizing your absence, and most people confuse the two without realizing the damage it causes. Empathic partners often believe their capacity for understanding is a gift they are offering freely, when in truth, many empaths are unconsciously trying to earn safety through emotional labor. This is rarely discussed, and it deserves attention here. An empath who over-explains, over-gives, and over-adjusts for an avoidant partner is often replaying an old belief that love must be earned through effort, that stillness is not enough, that simply being themselves will not be sufficient to keep someone close. This belief did not begin in the current relationship. It began somewhere earlier, in a household, in a friendship, in a moment where love felt conditional on performance. So while the avoidant partner is protecting themselves from closeness, the empath is simultaneously protecting themselves from abandonment, and both people are fighting battles that have almost nothing to do with each other, yet those battles collide inside the same relationship every single day. Silence, when misread, becomes the breeding ground for the fourth mistake, and this one is perhaps the most emotionally costly of all. Do not interpret an avoidant partner's need for space as confirmation of your unworthiness. The moment you internalize their retreat as proof that you are too much, not enough, or fundamentally unlovable, you begin altering who you are to prevent future retreat. This is where self-abandonment quietly enters the relationship disguised as adaptability. You start shrinking your needs, softening your voice, apologizing for existing fully, all in an attempt to become someone incapable of triggering distance. But here is the harsh truth almost nobody says out loud. A love that requires you to disappear in order to be kept is not a love worth preserving in its current form. Self-respect is not the enemy of connection. Self-respect is the foundation that determines whether connection can survive at all. Power in a relationship rarely announces itself. It moves quietly beneath the surface. expressed not through control but through who determines the emotional temperature of the room. When one person constantly monitors the other's mood, adjusts their tone based on a text left unanswered, or feels their entire day shift based on a partner's silence, an invisible transfer of power has already taken place. This transfer is almost never intentional. Nobody sits down and decides to surrender their emotional sovereignty to another human being. It happens slowly, through 1,000 small concessions, until one day a person realizes they no longer recognize their own baseline of peace without checking in with someone else first. Reclaiming that sovereignty is not an act of coldness. It is an act of psychological survival. Attachment wounds operate like scar tissue formed around an old injury, and scar tissue behaves strangely under pressure. Touch it gently, and it may feel nothing at all. Touch it the wrong way, even slightly, and the pain returns as though the original wound happened yesterday. This explains why an avoidant partner can seem perfectly fine one moment and suddenly distant the next, often triggered by something that appears microscopic from the outside, a tone of voice, an unspoken expectation, a question that felt like an interrogation rather than curiosity. Understanding this does not mean walking on eggshells. It means recognizing that reactions are rarely about the present moment alone. They are echoes of an older story still replaying beneath conscious awareness. Modern culture has trained people to believe that emotional intensity equals emotional depth, and this belief quietly sabotages relationships with avoidant partners more than almost anything else. Grand gestures, dramatic declarations, constant expressions of feeling, these are often mistaken for intimacy when in reality they can overwhelm a nervous system already operating near capacity. Depth is not loud. Depth is consistent. An avoidant partner is far more likely to trust quiet reliability over passionate declarations because reliability requires no performance, and performance is precisely what their body has learned to distrust. This does not mean suppressing genuine feeling. It means understanding that steady presence often communicates more safety than any single dramatic moment ever could. There is a psychological concept rarely applied to romantic relationships that explains this dynamic with startling clarity: the idea of approach and withdrawal conditioning. In behavioral psychology, when a stimulus consistently appears the moment discomfort arises, the nervous system begins associating that stimulus itself with discomfort, regardless of its original intention. Applied here, if closeness consistently arrives the moment an avoidant partner needs space, closeness itself becomes associated with suffocation, even though closeness was never the actual threat. This is why timing matters more than most people realize. Offering connection during a moment of retreat, however well intended, can inadvertently train the very avoidance you are trying to dissolve. Consider the story of two rivers running parallel to each other, never touching, yet both moving toward the same ocean. From a distance they appear disconnected, even indifferent to one another, yet their paths were shaped by the same landscape, carved by similar pressures, guided by similar gravity. Two people in a relationship often resemble those rivers more than they resemble a single merged stream. Real intimacy does not require constant contact to remain real. It requires trust that both paths are still moving in the same direction, even during seasons where the distance between them feels wide. Most people panic the moment distance appears, mistaking space for separation, when space is often simply the terrain the relationship must cross to reach deeper ground. Shame operates as the hidden architect behind avoidant behavior far more often than fear does, and this distinction changes everything about how healing must occur. Fear says danger is coming. Shame says something is fundamentally wrong with who I am if I let you close enough to see it. An avoidant partner withdrawing is frequently not protecting themselves from you. They are protecting you from a version of themselves they have not yet made peace with internally. This reframes the entire dynamic. Instead of interpreting withdrawal as rejection of your worth, understanding shame as the underlying mechanism allows compassion without requiring you to sacrifice your own boundaries in the process. Empaths often carry an unconscious belief that their sensitivity is a liability rather than an asset, and avoidant partners often mistake that same sensitivity for something they secretly crave but consciously fear. This creates a magnetic pull between the two attachment styles that few people fully understand. The empath is drawn to the avoidant's calm exterior, mistaking composure for stability. The avoidant is drawn to the empath's emotional fluency, mistaking it for a kind of permission to feel safely for the first time. Both are chasing something the other appears to possess naturally, unaware that both are operating from incomplete internal systems, each holding half of what the other lacks, yet neither fully equipped to teach the other how to access it. Discipline, not desperation, is what ultimately determines whether love with an avoidant partner deepens or dissolves entirely. Discipline here does not mean rigid detachment or performing indifference to win some imagined game of who cares less. It means the disciplined practice of returning to your own center regardless of how the other person is behaving in any given moment. This is far harder than chasing, harder than pursuing, harder than any dramatic gesture, because discipline requires sitting with discomfort without immediately trying to resolve it through someone else's reassurance. The person who masters this discipline does not become cold, they become unshakable, and unshakable presence is the single most attractive quality to a nervous system that has spent a lifetime bracing for instability. Suffering enters this dynamic not through the presence of distance, but through the meaning assigned to that distance. Two people can experience identical silence from a partner, yet one suffers immensely while the other remains grounded, and the difference lies entirely in interpretation. The one who suffers believes silence means abandonment is imminent. The one who remains grounded understands silence as simply one possible phase within a much longer story still being written. This is not naive optimism. It is psychological maturity, the ability to tolerate uncertainty without immediately collapsing into worst-case narratives that were never confirmed in reality. Personal responsibility enters this conversation at the exact moment you stop asking what the avoidant partner needs to change and start asking what pattern within yourself keeps attracting or amplifying this dynamic. This question is uncomfortable, and it should be, because growth rarely arrives wrapped in comfort. Perhaps the pattern is a fear of being truly seen, hiding safely behind partners who are emotionally unavailable so that closeness never has to be fully tested. Perhaps the pattern is an old belief that love must be difficult to be legitimate. Whatever the pattern, ownership of it does not mean blaming yourself for someone else's avoidance. It means recognizing that healing this cycle requires more than changing another person's behavior. It requires changing the internal beliefs that keep you standing at that particular door in the first place. Trust, at its deepest level, is not built through words exchanged during peaceful moments. Trust is built through what happens in the space right after conflict, in the seconds where a person could either flee or stay, and how that choice gets handled by both sides. An avoidant partner is not testing you when they withdraw after tension, even though it often feels that way. Their nervous system is running an old internal calculation, checking whether this disagreement will end the way past disagreements once ended, in punishment, in coldness, in the slow erosion of safety. When you respond to their withdrawal with steadiness instead of panic, something remarkable begins happening at a level far beneath conscious thought. Their body begins collecting evidence that this relationship might be different from the ones that taught them retreat was necessary for survival. Few people ever examine the quiet exhaustion that lives inside an avoidant person who genuinely wants closeness but does not know how to tolerate it without eventually needing to escape. This exhaustion is rarely spoken about because it contradicts the popular narrative that avoidant people simply do not want intimacy. The truth is far more complicated and far more human. Many avoidant partners want connection intensely, sometimes more than they can even admit to themselves, yet the sustained presence of closeness activates an internal alarm system built long before this relationship existed. Imagine running a marathon while your body insists you are actually in danger the entire time. That is what closeness can feel like for someone whose nervous system has never learned that safety and intimacy can coexist without one eventually destroying the other. Empathic partners frequently misread this internal alarm as personal rejection when it is closer to an automatic biological reflex, similar to flinching when something moves too quickly toward your face, regardless of whether that object intends harm. The flinch is not a judgment of the object, it is a conditioned response built from prior experience. When you understand withdrawal through this lens, you stop asking the exhausting question of what you did wrong and start asking a more accurate question, which is what old pattern got activated and whose responsibility is it to work through that pattern. This single shift in framing removes an enormous amount of unnecessary suffering from the relationship, not because the pain disappears, but because the pain stops being misdirected toward the wrong source. Here is a psychological insight almost never discussed openly, and it deserves full attention. Avoidant partners often unconsciously choose partners capable of enduring emotional distance, specifically because those partners will not force premature closeness before the avoidant nervous system is ready. This is not manipulation. It is an unconscious selection process running far beneath awareness, the same way a person recovering from physical injury instinctively seeks out environments that will not aggravate the wound further. The tragedy occurs when the enduring partner mistakes their tolerance for distance as evidence that distance is simply how love must always feel, slowly normalizing a level of disconnection that erodes their own identity over time without them realizing the erosion is even happening. Philosophy offers a lens rarely applied to modern attachment struggles, particularly the ancient distinction between attachment and dependency. Attachment, in its healthiest form, allows two people to remain whole individuals who choose connection freely, without the relationship becoming the sole source of identity or worth. Dependency, however, collapses that distinction entirely, making one person's emotional survival contingent upon the other's constant availability. Avoidant partners often sense dependency before it is even consciously expressed, and something inside them recoils, not because dependency is unlovable, but because dependency places a weight onto the relationship that no single human being was ever meant to carry alone. Understanding this distinction transforms how love gets practiced, shifting the goal from becoming someone's everything toward becoming someone's steady, self-respecting equal. There is a strange kind of grief that empathic partners rarely name correctly. The grief of loving someone who is physically present yet emotionally guarded, a grief that has no clear ending because nothing has technically been lost. This ambiguous loss creates a unique psychological toll because grief typically requires closure to move through its stages, yet this particular grief exists in a permanent state of almost close, almost open, almost enough. Naming this experience accurately matters, because unnamed pain tends to metastasize into resentment, anxiety, or self-blame, while acknowledged pain can finally be processed with clarity instead of confusion. A question worth sitting with honestly is this: what does it say about your own relationship with yourself if peace only arrives once someone else confirms your worth through their consistency? This question is not designed to induce guilt. It is designed to reveal where your internal foundation currently rests. If that foundation depends entirely on external confirmation, then even a securely attached partner would eventually feel like insufficient proof, because the problem was never actually about the partner's attachment style in the first place. It was about an internal void seeking permanent external repair, a repair no other human being was ever capable of providing completely. Consider the metaphor of a lighthouse standing along a rocky coastline, built not to chase every ship struggling in the distance, but to remain steady and lit regardless of which direction the water moves. Ships that are ready will find their way toward that light on their own timeline, guided not by pursuit, but by consistency. Ships that are not ready may drift elsewhere entirely, and no amount of the lighthouse moving closer to the water will change that timing. Becoming the lighthouse rather than the ship chasing after uncertain water is one of the most difficult psychological transformations a person can undergo, because it requires releasing the illusion of control while still remaining fully present and available. Avoidant partners frequently experience a quiet, almost invisible loneliness that most people never suspect exists behind their composed exterior. Their independence, so often praised or admired, sometimes conceals an inability to ask for help even when help is desperately needed. This loneliness rarely gets expressed directly, because expressing need once felt like exposing weakness that would eventually be exploited or dismissed. Recognizing this hidden loneliness does not mean rescuing them from it, since rescue attempts often trigger the very withdrawal you are trying to prevent. It means holding space for their eventual willingness to reach outward without forcing that willingness to arrive before its time. Real transformation begins the moment you stop measuring your worth by another person's capacity for closeness and start measuring your growth by your own capacity to remain grounded regardless of their response. This shift does not happen through a single decision made in a moment of frustration. It happens through repeated practice, through choosing self-respect even when old patterns whisper that self-abandonment feels safer or more familiar. Every time you resist the urge to shrink, chase, over-explain, or punish distance with withdrawal, you are rewiring not just the relationship dynamic, but your own nervous system's definition of what love is allowed to look like. This rewiring is slow, often invisible in the moment, yet it compounds into a version of yourself capable of loving deeply without losing yourself entirely inside another person's unresolved history. You are not responsible for fixing someone else's fear of closeness, but you are entirely responsible for whether you disappear while waiting for that fear to heal. The four mistakes are not really about the avoidant partner at all. They are about the parts of you still willing to trade your peace for someone else's comfort. Starting today, choose one thing. Stop offering reassurance you were never asked for, and watch how much of yourself returns the moment you stop performing certainty for someone still learning how to trust it. Self-respect is not a wall built to keep love out. It is the ground you stand on so love, when it finally arrives ready, has somewhere solid to land. A love that requires your disappearance was never asking you to stay. It was asking you to leave yourself first, and the most powerful thing you will ever do is refuse.